Romans chapter 8, verses 18 to 30, which is page 1003 in the Church Bibles. For I consider that the suffering of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us. For the creation eagerly waits with anticipation for God's sons to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in the hope that the creation itself will also be set free from the bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of God's children. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together with labour pains until now. Not only that, but we ourselves who have the Spirit as the first fruits, we also groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. Now in this hope we were saved. But the hope that is seen is not hope, because who hopes for what is seen? Now if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with patience. In the same way, the Spirit also helps us in our weakness, because we do not know what to pray for as we should, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with unspoken groanings. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because he intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. For we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. For those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called. And those he called, he also justified. And those he justified, he also glorified.
Today, in the two services I'm taking, I am both morning and evening looking into Romans. And this is not why I'm doing it, it's just an observation I've had on it. This morning is in a chapter which I think many of us will have some favourite verses in here. You know, this is a treasure trove chapter that will have brought much encouragement to many of us in many different situations. It's just full of such obvious and uplifting truths. This evening, I can pretty much guarantee it's a chapter that none of us will have a favourite verse in it. So it'll be the other end of the spectrum. And as I said, that's not why I picked the two, it just happens to be like that. But this morning we are looking at verses 18 to 30 of Romans 8 under this title of Seeing Through Suffering. Hopefully from the outset of the service you've seen the importance of seeing. We sang to begin with, come behold the wondrous mystery. We need to set our eyes on things above. We need to be looking at those glorious truths and our glorious God, who by seeing him, it will have a life-transforming impact. But sometimes it's hard to see, isn't it? One of the times when it's hard to see is when we've got tears in our eyes. One of the times we've got tears in our eyes is when we're suffering. How do you see through suffering when you've got tears in your eyes? How do you see the way ahead when you're in deep suffering? When, if you're honest, the future looks bleak, far from what you'd ever hoped for it to be, far from your anticipated life. It looks very bleak. How do you see when you feel broken and in pain? Maybe pain of the body, maybe brokenness of the body, weakness, increasing weakness of the body, but maybe a sense of brokenness and pain in the mind, maybe in the soul, where handling the realities of life have taken you low. How do you see then? How do you see when you're disappointed, deeply disappointed, disappointed with life, disappointed with what's happened, disappointed with people you were really close to, people you were committed to, people who you loved and people who you thought loved you. How do you see them? When you've been let down, when you've been betrayed. Romans 8 verses 18 to 30 will help us, but not with glib, trite sayings. And there are some verses in this passage which we will see have been used and abused by being taken out of their Bible context and have been glib, trite sayings. And they sometimes can just add to the pain. But what this passage will do will help us to set our suffering in the context of life and of God's purposes. It will bring us huge encouragement, but it will also face us with some brutally honest truth. And together that will be our solace. But the brutally honest truth is where we start. It starts with a fact, and the fact is we will suffer. And in fact, the truth goes fairly a good step further than that. Not merely will we suffer, it starts with a statement that says we are suffering. Verse 18 says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time," that's life. That's the brutal truth about life that we are introduced to there. That sufferings are not a mere possibility, that some Christians will experience, that we may have the odd drop of rain, as it were, on our heads over the years, but the reality is that there are sufferings of this present time, and that is life, as we know it to be. A lot of people are shocked when they suffer. The shock is expressed in the questions that we ask. Not that it's wrong to ask these questions, but when we ask the question, why is this happening? Why? Why is it happening to me? Behind those questions is a real shock, like, it shouldn't be happening, should it? This shouldn't be my lot, should it? And it seems to me, by observation, that those kind of questions and that shock of why is this happening to me is especially true, is especially the case in countries which enjoy a relatively comfortable style of life. So countries that enjoy the better healthcare, a more stable and prosperous economy, and a fair degree of peace, are the very countries where we are more shocked when something goes wrong. Whereas those who mature, grow up in a context where suffering is frequent and the norm, obvious suffering, there tends not to be that same degree of shock because they are more used to it. It seems that the better we have it, the more shocked we are when something goes wrong. And on one level that's understandable, and yet isn't it a shame? That the very blessings God showers upon us so generously become the cause of our spiritual struggles when things go wrong. And the reality is as well that Christians have another reason to be shocked. And that is that they belong to God. And that this God is not some distant being who has nothing to do with them, but he declares himself to be our Heavenly Father, with all the very best that title involves. A Father who loves, who cares, who supports us through every season of life. And he, if we're Christians, he's our Father. And an understandable logic says within us, won't he keep me from such things? Surely, if he loves me, he wouldn't do this. There is one believer of a previous generation, a previous century, I can't remember which century it was, who in rage to God at one time of suffering turned in prayer to God and said to him, look, if this is how you treat your friends, I understand why you haven't got many. Because there's a sense in which it kind of doesn't make sense. Would we treat our friends like this? Would we treat our family like this? And yet our Heavenly Father, fully in control of all that happens, brings these things, allows these things in our lives. Why? At one level doesn't seem to make sense. It would have been thrilling to read the whole chapter this morning. I didn't jump up when Steph finished because I was just waiting for the rest of the chapter because I'd forgotten where I was to stop, because it's just so thrilling, isn't it? The whole chapter, the earlier verses, the later verses, wonderful, wonderful truths. And the earlier section, you may be familiar with it, you may not, but it begins with therefore there is now no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. That might be one of your favourite verses, but it has all those beautiful truths, joy-giving truths within it for those who are, as that first verse states, in Christ Jesus. It begins with that reality of forgiveness, of the fact that there is no condemnation, and it ends with us being God's children leading to an inheritance we will receive as heirs. So let me just read verses 14 to 17 for you. For those who are led by God's Spirit are God's sons, God's children. What a truth that is. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. Instead, you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies together with our spirit that we are God's children. And if children, also heirs. Heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. So it ends beautifully on that note of being heirs, ready for an inheritance that God has promised for all of his children. But did you notice how suddenly there was this descent into this reality of sufferings? Oh, we're heirs indeed, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. If indeed we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. These are the realities. The if there isn't, or maybe some of us will, it is actually saying, this is the train, here's the various stages along the route, and there is suffering. And if we're God's children, then we will suffer, so that we may also be glorified with him. So let's see, looking at this passage, how we can see through suffering. First of all, let's look at what to look at when you're suffering. And we're focusing particularly on verses 18 to 25. Verse 18 says, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed in us. We're called to look, lifting our eyes, looking to the future, looking to the glory that was there at the end of verse 17, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. But here in verse 18, we're to look at the glory, which is not worth being compared with the sufferings of the present time. And we're to look at this to get a sense of perspective. We're to see the sufferings of our present time, and we're to see them against the backcloth, the perspective of eternal glory, of the glory that we will have for all of eternity. Will you please notice that in verse 18, this is the glory that will be revealed to us, but that actually what most translations, I think almost every other translation, gives us here, is that it's a glory that is going to be revealed in us. And I think that's accurate, so I'm going to stick with that. You see, we may rightly think of glory when we think of seeing the face of the Lord Jesus Christ, when we will see him face to face, when we will see the glory of his everlasting countenance. But Paul takes us further here by talking about glory that will be revealed in us. In us. Now what is he talking about there? Well, I think 1 John 3 and verse 2 gives us something of a context, even though Romans 8 doesn't. It again takes us to eternity and says, dear friends, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet been revealed, but we know that when he appears, we will be like him. Why? Because we will see him as he is. So that glorious sight of Jesus is seen there to have a transforming impact on us. And the transformation is that his glory will become our glory. That the glory seen in him will then be seen in us. We will become like him, like Jesus. Can you believe that? I mean, I need to be looking in a mirror. Sorry I'm looking at you, but I can't believe that this person, with all my faults and failings, can ever be like Jesus. Can you? You don't need to answer for me. I know you can't imagine that. I meant that for yourself. Just think of it for yourself before you condemn me. Can you imagine that one day you'll be like Jesus? That's fantastic. So like Jesus that we will be glorious. His glory will become our glory because we will become in so many ways like him. And that, I think, is what Paul is referring to here. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed in us. Apologies that the CSB has used to us, but in us is I think, a better translation there. What a thing to share his glory. And this is something that Peter, the Apostle Peter, personally testifies concerning. And again, he connects in an interesting way both suffering and glory. He 1 Peter 5 verse 1 says, I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness to the sufferings of Christ, as well as one who shares in the glory about to be revealed. We're going to share in this glory. Christ is the one who ultimately has suffered more than any of us. And we're going to share in the glory that's going to be revealed, the glory of Jesus. Now, if that's what we're to look at when we're suffering, if we're to look at eternity, if we look at glory, Jesus' glory, and the effect that his glory will have on us, so that there'll actually be glory in us, what do we tend to do with that truth? I think we tend to clobber ourselves or others with it and say, I told you, we shouldn't worry about all this suffering. We shouldn't think about it. We shouldn't talk about it. We shouldn't concentrate on it. We should just think about Jesus. We should just think about eternity. We should just think about heaven. It's interesting how a beautiful truth can be used to harm us. Now you might be thinking, well, yeah, that verse seems to say so, doesn't it? I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us. So why compare them? Why even talk about them? One commentator would agree with you. He said that the apostle immediately downplays the severity of the sufferings experienced by believers. I'm going to say read the passage, and I'm going to say respectfully, Mr. Commentator, no, and very much no. Yes, put them in perspective, but he doesn't downplay the sufferings experienced by believers. Very far from downplaying them, he goes on to a little interlude about them. So look at verse 19. He says, for the creation eagerly waits for the anticipation for God's sons to be revealed. Let me explain this step by step. So verse 19 is saying, look, it's not just us who are suffering, it's actually all of creation. It's the whole of creation, and it's waiting with eager anticipation for a transformation. Not just our personal transformation, we look forward to that, but it's talking about a transformation of all creation. So that what we have throughout the Bible, especially in Revelation, is a new heavens, a new earth, a transformation which is an utter and total renovation of the old. And creation is watching and waiting with this sense of anticipation. Why? Because it's not only us, but it's the whole of creation which has been suffering, which is suffering. It comes on to that in verses 20 and 21. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, because of him, God, who subjected it, in the hope that the creation itself will also be set free from the bondage to decay. Creation has got this bondage on it, a bondage to decay. Everything gets worse. Everything grows old and dies. Nothing breaks that third law of thermodynamics, entropy, a tendency to decay, to diminishing in this world. Will be set free from the bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of the children of God. And how serious is this suffering of creation? How does Paul describe it in its seriousness? Which includes us, but when it talks about creation, it includes us, but it's more than us as well. It's the whole of creation. Look at verse 22. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together with labour pains until now. Is Paul diminishing the pains of suffering? It's got to take a male commentator, hasn't it, to write something like that, to have said he downplays the severity of the sufferings experienced by believers. He compares them with labour pains. Now, it may be a surprise to you, but I've never experienced them. I've never experienced them. I have not personally experienced them. I've been at the side of one who has experienced them on 3 very lengthy occasions. And it doesn't look good to me. I never said, after any child was born, let me do it for you next time. Please, I'm willing to go through. Carry on, it's your job. I am very glad of them. There's no diminishing here. There's no downplaying of the suffering. There's a very deep recognition that this suffering is absolutely awful. It's terrible. I think, lady, it often makes you scream. And let's remember, there's no painkillers of any repute in these days. This was absolutely awful suffering. And that is the suffering of creation. That is the suffering of the people of God. And it's made to be clear in verse 23 that this degree of suffering is most definitely true of us as well. Not only that, but we ourselves who have the Spirit as the first fruits, we also groan. The same groaning together from verse 22, groaning together with labour pains. We also groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. We're groaning, we're in pain, we're in agony with the sufferings of this present time. I want to say Paul doesn't downplay them, but he does put them in perspective. Yes, they are the groans of labour pains. No matter how serious and awful those are, they're not even worth comparing with the glory which will be revealed in us. That's the perspective. That's the perspective that we need. And so he goes on to say from the middle of verse 23, we also groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. Now in this hope the redemption of our bodies, this hope of adoption, this hope of glory. In this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is not hope, because who hopes for what we see? It's future, you see. We don't see it yet. We've not got it yet. Now, if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with patience. So as we suffer, as we're suffering the agonies of labour pains, groaning as believers because of the sufferings of this present time, we equally simultaneously, eagerly wait, patiently wait in hope of the adoption, the redemption of our bodies, the glory that we will be like him. Now that's what we look at when we're suffering. All of that. We're to look at Jesus, to look at glory, his glory, the glory that will be in us. But we also have a very honest look at the realities of sufferings in that context. Secondly, what to do when you are suffering. We're focusing now on verses 26 and 27. I think if we went out to discoverers now and say, now then children, what should we, if we're followers of Jesus, what should we do when we are suffering? I think the Sunday school class, the discoverers class, could tell us. They could tell us. They could tell us about that, absolutely. They would say, pray. That's what you're to do. That's a Sunday school answer, isn't it? We are to pray. And how many times have you been told to do that when you're suffering? Pray. Pray more. Maybe if you prayed about it. Maybe if you prayed about it, it'd be different. Maybe if you prayed about it, God would change it. And how many times has that hurt? Because it's said as if you never thought of it. You have. And you've been praying. You've been seeking the Lord. But you've not seen anything happen yet. Now, if you have only ever experienced prayer flowing fully and freely and passionately when you are suffering, can I suggest you praise the Lord and thank him for that? But also, don't beat up your brother or sister who has found that at such times prayer has dried up like a shriveled grape to almost nothing. Dried up like a spring in the desert. And at the same time, will you also notice what Paul recognises as highly likely about prayer when you are suffering? Verse 26. In the same way, the Spirit also helps us in our weakness, because we do not know what to pray for as we should. He seems to suggest that the very likely situation when you are suffering is that prayer will, as it were, dry up. We won't know what to pray for as we should. We will be spiritually flabbergasted. We will be prayerfully just out of tune and not knowing how to pray. And what weakness is he referring to? Verse 26, he helps us in our weakness. Well, the end of the verse perhaps gives us the answer to this. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with inexpressible groanings. The weakness here, I think, is predominantly the weakness we have in praying while we're in the midst of sufferings. He helps us by his Spirit, and he helps us with inexpressible groanings. And they're his inexpressible groanings. The Spirit himself intercedes with inexpressible groanings. They are inexpressible groanings for us, and that's what intercession means. It's stepping in on behalf of another. But they're his groanings interceding for us. He pictures us in this setting managing at best something similar to what the Spirit is bringing here. Inexpressible groanings, or as one translation puts it, wordless groans. And yet something deeply spiritual and mysterious is happening. Because when the Spirit, verse 26, himself intercedes for us with inexpressible groanings, it says in then verse 27, and he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit. Who is that but God himself? Because he intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. So, what do you do when you're suffering? The Sunday school answer is pray. I would suggest a change here. To suggest that the better answer might be we should engage in inexpressible groanings. If that's the best we can manage, that is great, because you know what? That's what the Spirit manages. And if that's what the Spirit is managing, I'm quite happy to join him in those inexpressible groanings. And to feel no huge obligation to be able to pray fluently and poetically. Nothing of the sort. If the Spirit intercedes for us with inexpressible groanings, then I'm perfectly happy with inexpressible groanings myself. Now, I don't think I've ever been told to do that when I suffer. I don't think I've ever been told what you need to do when you suffer is to bring inexpressible groanings to God. But isn't that what the passage is indicating for us? And of course he will hear. Our God will hear. It's intercession, prayer on behalf of another, made by the Spirit to the Father. The Father searches our hearts and knows exactly what's going on inside us. He understands the Spirit whose mind is one with the Father. So it is guaranteed that this prayer, this inexpressible groaning prayer, is going to be in accordance with the will of the Father. And you know the promises of the New Testament that say that if they're prayers that are in accordance with his will, they will be given to us. Answering is guaranteed. So that's what to do when you suffer. What to look at when you're suffering. We're to look at glory, but we're also to look at suffering. What are we to do when we're suffering? We are to bring inexpressible groanings to God as our prayers. And then finally, let's look at this. What to hold on to when you're suffering. What to hold on to when you're suffering. Verses 28 to 30. Now, I don't know whether this would be true of junior church. I've got a youth group in mind. If a Sunday school class could answer the previous question of what should we do when we're suffering, if we ask a youth group, if we ask perhaps junior church, what should we hold on to? It's a bit of a leading question. What should we hold on to when we're suffering? They may well say God's promises. God's promises. And they might, and you might even know perhaps what is one of the best known promises of the Bible, and that is verse 28. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. What a promise. In 1986, I became pastor at Bethel Evangelical Church in Bottle. And it's a small church, predominantly elderly. In fact, my wife and I, we were 23, 24 at the time. There was nobody else under 65. You know, it was big gap. And then about half a dozen in their 80s. And there was one dear old lady who always wore a mauve coat, thick coat, even in the sun. Mauve hat, always turned out well. Florid Broadbent, that's a good Yorkshire name, isn't it? Florid Broadbent. Florid. I was talking to Florid about something one day, and she just said to me, it's in the All Things. What? It's in the All Things. Sorry, what do you mean? We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God. That's what she was talking about. And she developed this little phrase, when things weren't easy, when things weren't good, to remind herself, it's in the all things. The all things that are under God's control, the all things that He is working together for good for those who love God and are called according to His purpose. It's in the all things. But I wonder whether this verse has ever been used by some well-meaning soul and it's felt like a knife digging in you. Oh, it's in the all things. See, such a phrase can on the one hand be beautifully deep in its faith, or it can be glib and trite, and it can cut deep if we are not careful. Because the verse says we know that all things work together for good, so people say this is working for good, it'll work for good, just wait and see what good comes out of this. And it doesn't feel good at all. Well, what is this good that is being referred to here? Well, let's see a few things about this. First of all, who this good applies to, and then what is this good referring to? First thing we need to say is that who this good applies to is only a certain category of people in the world. It's not for everyone. This is not a promise you can give to everyone. It says we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to His purpose. They're not two sets of people. They're two descriptions for the same set of people. They're people whom God has called according to His eternal purpose of salvation. And they are loved by Him, and they love Him who first loved them. So they love God, and they are called according to His purpose. So this is a promise only for believers. And if you're not a believer and you're thinking that leaves me out in the cold, well, it kind of does, but the door is open for you to come in. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." One of the ways that I will give you rest is in your suffering. And you will then know the truth of this promise for you, so come to Him. But what is the good that this is referring to? Well, the good that God has in mind is explained then in verses 29 to 30, where it says, For those He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, so that He, Jesus, would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those He predestined, He also called, and those He called, He also justified, and those He justified, He also glorified. What's it saying? It's saying, look, if you're a child of God, the destiny has been set. That's what the word predestined means. People get all in a stew about this word predestined. Just look at what it means. Just predestined. Pre is before, destined is destiny set. Predestined means your destiny has been set. And what is the destiny that has been set? For those He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son. That's the destiny. That's the destiny. You've been predestined to look like His Son. That's fantastic, isn't it? The destiny has been set. It's so that you might bear the family likeness. So it says at the end of the verse, so that He would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. He's the first one ascended to heaven. He's the kind of therefore the firstborn. We follow Him. Brothers and sisters, there's a family likeness, and we know it in our families sometimes whether we like it or not. If you want to know where I got my ears, blame my father. There's a family likeness, and it is to be seen. And it's contained in the family. But here, the family likeness to Jesus, we rejoice in. And the fact is that when the destiny has been set by God, nothing is going to derail, distract, or divert this train from its predetermined destination. And the destination goes on to talk about being justified and even glorified in verse 30. The whole destiny is laid out for us. We're justified, we're called by God to justification so that our sin is taken away, and one day we'll be glorified. It's so certain that we will be glorified, he can speak about it as if it's happened already. Notice that those he justified, end of verse 30, those he justified, he also glorified, as if it's happened. It's in the past tense, isn't it? It's as if it's happened already. Well, it hasn't happened. But it's so certain that it can be spoken of as if it has. And so, with that, do you notice we're back to the beginning where we started? To know that the sufferings of this present time are not worth being compared with the glory that is going to be revealed in us. Going to be glorified. So hold on to this promise, this beautiful promise, but not simplistically, not in the glib, all things work together for good, so everything will be all right before long. No, it doesn't say everything will be all right before long. It says everything will be all right in eternity. When you, if you're a child of God, look like your elder brother, you bear the family likeness. And he's not ashamed to call us brothers and sisters, because we'll have the family likeness. So hold on to it, but not simplistically. See that the purposes of God is that you become increasingly like Jesus. And the good thing he is working in you is that though in eternity you'll be fully like him, these sufferings are being used to make you a little bit more like him. Day after day, year after year. And that's true in life, isn't it? Do you not notice as some people grow older, they look even more like their father or mother? That's scaring me. I'll not go down that route yet. That's how I'm going. It's happening. That's how it happens. Will we edge our way towards him? And then one day there'll be this massive transformation where we see him as he is, and everything is changed from glory into glory. Let me end with this illustration that might help us to get our heads around this. A number of years ago I did a course where I had to travel once a month over from Leeds to Manchester on the train. And when I got on the Manchester train, I was ever so glad that the destination had been predestined. I got on the Manchester train, and for all the weaknesses of the British Rail, the Manchester train just go to Manchester. It is not going to London or to York or to Edinburgh. It is going to Manchester. So I was very glad it was going to that predetermined destination. The destiny had already been set. But I got on that train and I wanted to get to Manchester, but you know what happened every time? We'd hardly started and the train stopped. And it stopped for Huddersfield. Apologies for those from Huddersfield. But I didn't want to stop at Huddersfield. I'll be very naughty. Who wants to stop in Huddersfield? I know there are some people who want to stop in Huddersfield, but they're glad to get out of it. I don't want to stop it, but all these people from Huddersfield piled on. But it was all part of the journey. And then we got going again, passing through the Pennon. Beautiful scenery, particularly on a sunny day. And it was glorious thing, no better than this. Then there are other days, terrible weather, the rain lashing, the wind blowing. And then on the way to Manchester, there are two, I believe if I remember rightly, there are two tunnels, one of them particularly long. And in those 2 tunnels goes into utter darkness. And your phone, no reception. You can be on a call, going into those tunnels, gone. Disconnected from the outside world. Utter darkness. And actually that can be so similar to our journey in life with God, where we don't get there as quick as we like. We have to stop at Huddersfield sometimes. And then there are good days, and there are bad days. And sometimes it's a long dark tunnel. And we wonder if we're ever going to get to the other end. But we've been predestined. We have been predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son. And that predestination takes us to our calling, our justification. And our Manchester, which actually I wasn't a great fan of Manchester either, but anyway, our destination, our Manchester, is glory. The presence of Jesus and being like Him. So hold on to the promise. That's where we're going. It's good and it's glorious.